No one in the galaxy truly believed that humans still existed. The very notion seemed more like myth than memory. They were legends, whispers carried from one corner of the void to another. The old record spoke of them, clever, chaotic beings who once strode among the stars, leaving a trail of both wonders and ruin. But that was centuries ago. Empires rose and fell countless times, never once encountering a human ship or hearing their distinctive voices across the comms. To the younger species, humans were fairy tales, cautionary fables to scare fledgling navigators or entertain the old and wise. And then the fleet came. It started small. A few faint energy signatures, detected on the fringes of the galactic core. At first, no one thought much of it. Another sensor ghost, a rogue anomaly, or perhaps some long-lost probe. The stars were vast and unpredictable. Such things happen all the time. But the signatures didn't fade. They multiplied. Grew stronger. At the Unified Galactic Consortium's Central Operations Hub, an analyst named Vryn leaned over her console, her fronds twitching idly as she studied the unexpected readout. She had been assigned to the Outer Sector Anomaly Watch, a position that required more patience than skill. Most days were spent logging the drift of ancient debris or cataloging faint transmissions from long-defunct probes. Today, however, her console showed something different. Another false positive? Her colleague Brim asked from the adjacent station, not even looking up from his meal tray. Vryn leaned closer, her fronds stiffening as she scrutinized the readout. The energy signatures had not only persisted but grown more coherent. "I don't think so," she said slowly. "It's forming a pattern. A deliberate trajectory." Brim set down his tray and leaned over to peer at her screen. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "That's definitely not debris." "Exactly. It's too regular. And look here," Vryn pointed at the waveform analysis. "It's using phased energy fields. That tech is supposed to be extinct?" Brim's eyes widened. "Extinct tech? You don't think?" "I don't know what I think," Vryn admitted. "But we need to report this." The transmission was flagged and sent up the chain. Within hours, the consortium's higher command began scrambling. Patrols were dispatched to the sector, and observers were ordered to maintain constant surveillance. The signals didn't waver. In fact, they increased. Day by day, the pattern grew more pronounced. Eventually, the source of the signals emerged from the starless void. A fleet of ships, their silhouettes unlike anything recorded in millennia. Reports from reconnaissance units described sleek, angular vessels cloaked in the blackness of space, their hulls faintly glowing with an eerie, unfamiliar energy. Each vessel emitted a faint, eerie glow, as if harnessing some ancient and forbidden energy. Observers noted the design of the fleet. No identifiable insignia, no known patterns, no resemblance to any of the major galactic powers. Only one conclusion remained, the unthinkable. "It's them," Brim whispered, the words almost caught in his throat. "It's humans?" The command center erupted into controlled chaos. Officers barked orders, analysts scrambled to update sensor readouts, and emissaries prepared hasty communiques to allied factions. The news spread like solar fire through the galactic network. The mythical humans who had vanished without a trace so long ago were returning. And they weren't coming quietly. Vryn watched the commotion from her station, her chest tightening as the scale of the event unfolded. She had always thought humans were a cautionary tale, a story told to illustrate the dangers of unchecked ambition. Now, as the ghostly fleet pressed closer to consortium space, she realized how wrong she had been. This was no legend. This was real. The first contact was brief, almost casual. A patrol squadron sent to intercept the fleet sent back a single audio message before all communications ceased. The recording was garbled, the voices strained, but one word emerged clearly: run. When the patrol's signal vanished entirely, the consortium's High Council declared a state of emergency. The fleet's trajectory was unmistakable, directly toward consortium space. Plans for a diplomatic envoy were discussed, but fear outweighed reason. A defense fleet was assembled, and battle stations along the border sectors were put on high alert. There would be no negotiations, not with a force whose very existence defied all known history. Vryn was assigned to a forward command post, poring over real-time sensor data as the fleet edged ever closer. The tension among the staff was palpable. The tension was palpable. Even her more experienced colleagues, seasoned veterans who had faced countless skirmishes, were on edge. They exchanged hushed theories and speculations, their voices low and tense. Were these really humans? What did they want? Why had they returned after all this time? As the lead ship of the mysterious fleet came into range, the sensors began picking up something else. an encoded transmission. At first, the consortium's decryption team struggled to make sense of it. The language was unfamiliar, the syntax unrecognizable. But then, after hours of effort, a pattern emerged. The voice that came through was calm and deliberate, speaking in a tongue that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for centuries. The message was short. Prepare to face the consequences of your arrogance. It was signed with a single word, a name that carried weight even among those who had dismissed humans as mere myths. A name that had once been whispered with both reverence and fear. And now it was back, heralding a fleet that seemed unstoppable. Vryn stared at the decoded message, her fronds trembling. This wasn't just a military maneuver. This was something far greater. Something that would shake the very foundation of the galaxy. They're real, she whispered. They're really real. Vryn's breath caught as the fleet's lead ship loomed larger in the tactical display, its sleek form casting a faint glow over the dimly lit command center. The screen's resolution sharpened, revealing details that sent a chill through the command center. The vessels were massive, far larger than any recorded consortium battleship. Their hulls shimmered with an almost organic fluidity, as if they were grown rather than constructed. Are you seeing this? Brim's voice wavered over the comms. I'm seeing it, Vryn replied, her fronds quivering. No heat signatures, no drive flares. They're moving like ghosts? Her words hung heavy in the air, the dim glow of the tactical display reflecting off tense faces around the room. The command post buzzed with tension as officers exchanged uneasy glances. The station's commander, a stoic veteran named Helker, stood rigid near the central display, his posture unyielding, his eyes locked onto the fleet's formation with unwavering focus. His scaled hands clasped behind his back, he stared at the fleet's formation with unblinking intensity. Any attempt to open a channel? Helker finally asked. Several, one of the comms officers answered. No response. Helker's mouth flattened into a grim line. He glanced at Vryn, his expression questioning. Are we certain this isn't an elaborate hoax? Brim, now standing at Vryn's station, shook his head. These energy readings are consistent. Whatever this is, it's real. Vryn nodded. And getting closer. If they maintain course, they'll reach the outer perimeter within an hour. Helker's sharp intake of breath was the only acknowledgement of her words. He turned to the room at large. All forward observation posts to full alert. Defense squadrons are to intercept immediately. We'll show them that the consortium is not to be trifled with. The officers scrambled to their stations, barking commands and typing furiously, the air electric with tension. On the tactical display, the fleet moved with eerie precision. The absence of standard propulsion markers made their approach feel almost supernatural, as if they were gliding on currents invisible to even the consortium's most advanced propulsion arrays. Vryn's console chimed and she leaned in closer, her fronds twitching nervously. Commander, we're detecting something else? Something else? Helker's eyes narrowed. She adjusted the controls, her fronds moving rapidly. It's faint, but there's another signal overlapping their trajectory. It's an old consortium beacon. A distress signal. Helker frowned. From where? Vryn pointed at the screen. It's coming from the fleet. Or rather, it's being carried with them. I'm tracing the exact source now. As she worked, Brim leaned closer. That doesn't make sense. Why would they have one of our beacons? I don't know, Vryn admitted. But it's ancient, decades at least. Maybe longer. Helker gestured for Vryn to continue her analysis. Find out where that signal originated and why it's attached to their fleet. He turned to the comms officer. Send a probe to intercept. We need eyes on whatever this is. Minutes later, a small recon probe launched from the nearest observation station, streaking toward the oncoming ships. The command center fell silent as everyone watched the feed. The probe's camera activated, providing a grainy live view of the fleet's lead vessel. The ship's surface seemed to ripple as the probe drew closer, its sleek form defying conventional logic. Visual contact, the comms officer announced. We're approaching their outer perimeter. The display showed the probe closing the gap. Then abruptly the feed went dark. Probe destroyed, the officer said, his voice tight. Helker's claws drummed against the console's edge, his eyes narrowing. Weapons fire? No, the officer replied. It looks like an energy field. It destabilized the probe before it could transmit further. The room buzzed with hushed speculation. Helker held up a hand for silence. Stay focused. We still have time to prepare. He turned back to Vryn. Any progress on that signal? She hesitated, then nodded. I've isolated the beacon's origin. It matches an old consortium exploration vessel lost over a century ago. Brim's mandibles clicked. Lost? As in destroyed? Presumed destroyed, Vryn corrected. It disappeared near the Ragna Nebula. But this beacon, it shouldn't exist anymore. Helker's expression darkened. Then the fleet has something of ours. Something they've carried all this way. Vryn shifted uneasily. Or someone? The room fell silent again, the weight of her suggestion settling heavily. Helker straightened. Double the patrols at the perimeter. I want full sensor sweeps every 30 seconds. If they mean to cross into consortium space, they'll find us waiting. Vryn kept her gaze fixed on the display, the faint hum of the machinery around her blending with the low murmurs of the crew, as she watched the ghostly fleet inch closer. She couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far more complex than it seemed. The beacon, the fleet's impossible technology, the silence on all frequencies, it all added up to something she couldn't yet grasp. They're hiding something, she murmured to Brim, her gaze lingering on the strange ripple patterns across the lead ship's surface. He nodded, his mandibles twitching nervously. The question is, what? The ghostly fleet did not deviate from its path. It pressed forward with the same steady, deliberate motion, leaving no room for misinterpretation. They were coming. And they would not stop. Vryn's station hummed with activity. The data feeds were alive with telemetry from the outer perimeter, the room filled with the low murmur of hushed voices and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. Every few seconds her console would chime as new information flowed in, more accurate trajectory models, refined energy readings, and most concerning of all, faint emissions of a technology long thought extinct. These phased arrays, she murmured, her fronds twitching as she analyzed the latest waveforms. They were designed for deep space communication and cloaking. I've only seen them mentioned in ancient archives. Brim leaned over her shoulder, his mandibles clicking with unease. Are you saying they're using something older than the consortium itself? Much older, Vryn confirmed. I don't even know how it's still functioning, let alone deployed on this scale. Helker's voice cut through the room. If we know what they're using, we can find a way to counter it. What are the vulnerabilities? Vryn shook her head. Commander, this technology predates modern countermeasures. We're essentially working blind. Helker's claws flexed against the console's edge. Then we'll have to rely on what we do know. Prepare the forward batteries and ready the interceptor wings. If they cross the perimeter, we hit them with everything we have. As the orders were carried out, the room's tension mounted. Each officer knew the stakes. The fleet's approach was slow but unrelenting, a wave that couldn't be turned back, only delayed. One of the junior comms officers spoke up, his voice trembling. Sir, I think we're receiving another signal. Another distress beacon? Helker asked sharply. No, sir, the officer replied, his eyes darting between his screens. It's a message, but it's not in any known language. Put it on speaker, Helker ordered. The room fell silent as a low, rhythmic sequence of tones filled the air. It rose and fell like a pulse, the cadence almost hypnotic. The sound carried a strange weight, as if it resonated not just in their ears but in their very minds. It was both alien and eerily familiar. Vryn adjusted her console's audio filters, trying to isolate patterns within the tones. It's not random, she said. There's structure here. This is deliberate. Deliberate doesn't help us understand it, Brim muttered. Do we have any translation algorithms that might work? Not yet, Vryn admitted. But I can try reconstructing the waveform into visual data. Maybe it'll give us something. The central display shifted as Vryn's efforts bore fruit. The tonal patterns translated into a series of symbols and shapes that spiraled across the screen. At first it was just a chaotic swirl. But then the shapes began to align. A pattern emerged, lines, angles, and arcs that formed something unmistakable. Helker stepped closer to the screen. What is that? It looks like, Vryn's voice trailed off. A star map. The room buzzed with quiet speculation as officers whispered to each other, their tones filled with unease and growing doubt. Brim's mandibles twitched. A map? To where? I don't know yet, Vryn said, her fronds shifting as she zoomed in on the image. It's not a region I recognize. But it's pointing us somewhere. Or perhaps warning us away. Helker's gaze remained locked on the display. Get that map fully rendered and cross-reference it with all known star charts, he said, his voice cutting through the growing tension. Around him, the officers snapped to action, their urgency evident in the swift clatter of keys and the shuffling of data pads. I want to know where it leads, and I want it before that fleet gets any closer. The officers scrambled to comply. The map grew clearer with each adjustment, but the destination remained enigmatic. It was a region of space that hadn't been charted since the earliest days of exploration, a place known only in the most ancient of records. A place whispered about in the same breath as the humans themselves. Vryn glanced at Helker, her voice low. If this map is what I think it is, we're heading toward the heart of the old human territories. Helker's claws tapped against the console again, a measured rhythm that betrayed his mounting unease. We need answers. And if that fleet reaches the perimeter before we have them, we'll have no choice but to engage. As the hours dragged on, the fleet continued its unyielding approach. Each new scan revealed odd patterns in the energy fields, unusual ship formations and relics of technology thought long extinct, bringing more questions than answers. The star map's destination loomed closer, as did the ghostly ships. Vryn worked tirelessly, her console flickering with calculations, her fronds a blur of motion. Brim stayed by her side, his mandibles clicking nervously as he tried to offer assistance. Finally Vryn's console beeped with a new data point. Her eyes widened. I think I've found it. The map, it leads to a system beyond the Ragna Nebula. But it's not just a destination. It's coordinates for a rendezvous. Helker's gaze snapped to her. A rendezvous with what? I don't know, Vryn admitted. But if the map is accurate, it was left as a guide. Something is waiting there. Something human. Vryn's fronds twitched with restless energy as she stared at the screen, the faint hum of machinery and muted chatter adding to the tension. The map coordinates flickered steadily, a constant reminder that something awaited them beyond the Ragna Nebula. Yet the mystery of the fleet's unrelenting approach consumed most of her attention. Every time she glanced at the tactical display, the ships were a little closer. Another sweep, Helker ordered, his voice a calm contrast to the tension in the room. I want every anomaly accounted for. Vryn's hands moved across her console, initiating a deeper scan. The fleet signature was unlike anything she had seen before, elegant, efficient, and utterly alien. Yet it was undeniably human. They're not slowing, Vryn said, though her voice betrayed the tension building in her chest. Still no communications. Just steady, continuous movement. Helker approached her station, his imposing frame casting a shadow over the controls. His gaze was steady, but the tightness in his jaw revealed his growing concern. If they're not responding, we must assume the worst. Do we have a contingency plan? Several, Brim answered from a nearby terminal. None of them good. The commander's jaw tightened. Then let's hope we don't need to use them. The minutes stretched into hours, the crew's initial curiosity giving way to hushed unease as the fleet drew ever closer. Vryn couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. The ship's configurations didn't match any known consortium design, and the energy readings defied classification. Every new scan only deepened the enigma. Her console beeped softly. Another data point appeared, this one distinct from the rest. It was faint, but it had a pattern, one she recognized. Her fronds stiffened. Commander, she said, I think we've picked up something new. Helker leaned in. What is it? Vryn worked quickly, isolating the signal. It's an old consortium identification code. But it's been heavily modified. Brim stepped closer, his mandibles clicking. You think it's a trap? I don't know, Vryn replied. It's coming from the lead ship. They're broadcasting a code we haven't seen in centuries. But if it's real? Helker's eyes narrowed. If it's real, then we might have more time than we thought. The command center fell silent. Vryn enhanced the signal, her display now showing a clearer view of the fleet's lead vessel. It loomed large on the screen, its black hull gleaming with faint, otherworldly light. There's something in the hull structure, she said, voice barely above a whisper. It's moving? Moving? Helker repeated, his tone sharp. Not like a conventional ship system. More like, Vryn hesitated. It's almost organic. The hull is reacting to our scans. It's adapting. Brim's mandibles clicked nervously. Are you saying these ships are alive? Not alive in the traditional sense, Vryn said, trying to keep her voice steady. But they're not just mechanical. There's a biological component. Something we've never encountered before. Helker straightened, his eyes narrowing. Then we're dealing with something far more dangerous than we imagined. He turned to the room. Prepare the perimeter defenses. I want every ship on alert. And keep monitoring that signal. If it's genuine, it might be the only clue we have to their intentions. As the room sprang into action, Vryn's focus remained locked on the lead ship. She could feel the weight of its presence even through the screens. It was as though the fleet was watching them just as closely. We need answers, she murmured to herself. before it's too late. The final minutes before the fleet reached the perimeter were thick with tension. Officers worked at a frantic pace, issuing orders, reviewing scans, and checking weapon systems. Vryn double-checked the signal, confirming its authenticity. It wasn't a fake. It was old, yes, but real. Someone, or something, aboard that fleet was sending a message. The first of the perimeter sensors activated, lighting up the tactical display. The lead ship entered range, its vast silhouette filling the screens. Vryn's console beeped again, and a new line of data scrolled across her screen. "They're charging something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some kind of energy buildup." Helker stepped closer. "Weapon systems?" "I don't think so," Vryn replied. "It's different. More like a signal burst." Before she could elaborate, the room was bathed in a soft, pulsing glow. The fleet had halted just outside the perimeter, their ships forming a perfect, unbroken line. The energy signature reached its peak, and then a burst of light filled the display. No explosions, no damage. Just a brilliant flash that seemed to ripple through the command center's systems. Screens flickered, consoles beeped in protest, and then everything settled. "Status report," Helker barked. Vryn checked her console. "No damage. The systems are stable. But we've got something else." "What is it?" "Another transmission," Vryn said, her fronds trembling with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "It's the same code. And it's addressed to us?" Helker's gaze locked onto the main display. "Put it through." The room fell silent as the transmission began. A voice came through, calm and steady. It spoke a language long forgotten, but the words carried a weight that transcended the barriers of time. Vryn's console translated as best it could, displaying the message in Consortium standard. "We come not to destroy but to remind. The past cannot be erased. Prepare for our arrival."